Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us for our monthly technical webinar. We're doing things a little bit different. We're making it a little bit more interactive with the people out there using the product instead of us giving a demonstration of a product. Before we get started with the webinar today, a couple of housekeeping items we'd like to go over. First and foremost, all call-in phones are automatically muted. Allows us to preserve the quality of the audio as we are recording the webinar today. Questions. This is a twofold one. If you do have any questions during the session, you are more than welcome to submit them into the questions box as part of the GoToWebinar. With this webinar, we actually asked our clients, our colleagues, and everybody available to submit questions at a time for maybe some issues or other elements that you may have within P6. We did have an overwhelming response to this particular webinar. We actually had 21 questions submitted for items that people thought they would need more information on within P6. We're going to try to get to as many of them as possible today. If you did submit a question and we don't get to it today, we are going to do a follow-up email, and in that follow-up email will be a question and answers log, and we're going to answer every single question that was either submitted prior or during today's session. We're going to get started with today's session, and I'm going to turn it over to Brian Chris, who is our Vice President of Operations.
All right, thank you, Dan, and thank you for everybody to join us today. As Dan mentioned, this is the second P6 user forum we've done as part of our monthly technical webinars, and we did receive a good amount of questions this time around. And I appreciate and thank everybody for sending those in. And as Dan mentioned, I'm going to do the best I can to get through as many of these as possible. Some I will go into the tool and try to explain maybe a little more of the explanation to provide an answers. Others I may go through a little more quickly. That said, after this call, after our webinar today, if there was anything you wanted to have any more follow-on conversation with myself, feel free to send me an email, give me a phone call, and I'll be happy to spend a little more time on the questions to get those addressed. The safe harbor statement, of course, a lot of the questions that we are going to be answering, I will be doing my best to provide an answer for those questions, as well as provide my opinions where appropriate. For those of you DRMcNatty, our products and services, we offer system implementation, cloud hosting services, as well as specialty services such as data integration, business intelligence reporting solutions, as well as project staffing. So if you are working on projects and need P6 schedulers or any other staffing support, we are a certified SB-DVBE firm that can provide such services. So our agenda for today is, the purpose here is to engage our user community in asking for and soliciting questions that you have about Primavera P6. And as Dan mentioned, we received a good amount of response. Some of the questions maybe were a little more, where is P6 going to be going? As Dan mentioned, all of the questions that we received will be answered in the Excel file. But for purposes of today, we are going to be going through, I think I have a list of maybe 13 questions in the PowerPoint that we want to try to address. And as always, this is the second time we've done this format for the webinar, so your comments and suggestions are welcome. Okay, so our first question is question number 1. How can we interpret resource loadings, period-based table from a schedule already in progress containing negative float? Loadings do not seem to make sense if negative float exists in the schedule. So this is a question, and I incorporate the question exactly how we received it. And the screenshot I took below is kind of a mock-up of what I interpret this potentially to mean, where the activity itself and the units and the resource loading do not maybe seem to be in alignment. So here's an example of an activity spreadsheet where the duration of the activity extends beyond the the resource. So the potential answer, I believe, to this lies not so much within the float value, be it positive or negative, but within the planned dates. So budget items in P6, when we're looking at resource, if we're looking at budgeted units, it is going to display those in a time-distributed fashion in according with the planned dates. And so planned dates are initially generated from the calculated early dates, and they will match as long as the activity has not registered an actual start. So just for a little more clarification on the planned dates, planned start for an activity is always going to equal the early start prior to an activity receiving a status, and status being an actual start for the activity. Once the actual start is given, the planned start date is frozen. There's also a planned finish date, and the planned finish is going to be equal to the planned start plus the original duration of the task. So as you can see, once an activity, as we can see up here in the example, once an activity begins progress, the actual dates, as we see here in the start and finish field, say from April 24th to May 8th, may differ from the planned dates. So if I'm looking at a planned dates from April 24th to April 28th, those would be different. And when I'm reviewing budgeted units, that's how the budgeted units will be displayed in accordance with the planned dates. And a lot of this research I was able to do on this particular item and looking at the planned dates. There's a published article from Ron Winter on the inner workings of P6, which goes into a lot of very good and informative detail about all of the different date fields and the calculations in P6. The planned dates are often something that can lead to a little bit of confusion. They are not necessarily synonymous with baseline dates, but they are a unique field in P6 that can be edited. But oftentimes when I see that an activity's resource distribution in terms of units are not aligned with the actual scheduled dates like we see here, where my activity dates range out here to May 8th, but my planned dates span a shorter window, my resource distribution when I'm looking at budgeted units can be different, and it can be a little bit odd and look a little bit different. So the answer to this question, check the planned dates. Make sure those first and foremost align with the activity dates, because once an activity receives progress, these dates can be different. So I would say the answer to this question is check your planned dates first. And again, I want to reiterate, I don't believe that the total float is necessarily what would be causing these dates to be out of alignment between the resource spread and the activity itself. Okay, so that was question number 1. Question number 2, what is the best way to handle out of sequence progressing? Should the schedule logic not be changed to eliminate the out of sequence activities? What is the best practice? So out of sequence progress is going to be whenever I've got, say in this example here, we've got 2 different examples of 3 activities, all linked finish to start between 1, 2, and 3. In P6, there are 2 ways in the software to handle out of sequence progress, and these are retain logic and progress override. And the ability to change or set these options are in the schedule window. Select the options and choose the method for how you would like Primavera to handle out of sequence progress, whether we use retain logic, such as we see up top here, where the remaining duration of the preceding task will drive the remaining duration of the successor task. This is our retain logic, or progress override, where once the second activity starts, it essentially controls its own destiny, for lack of a better term, but it is no longer dependent on the preceding activity. So in answering this question, this is, I think, a question that has a lot of debate within the scheduling community. There are opinions as to what is the best way to do it. Sometimes there are considerations to take into effect, such as if we're working on a project, are there any special provisions in the contract that preclude changing relationships? This would kind of make that decision for us. Oftentimes, if we work for contractors or other organizations, they may have a written policy and procedure as to what to do when we have out of sequence progress. But the points of view can vary on this topic. I will offer my personal opinion. I believe that updating the relationships, particularly around the in-progress activities, is the best way to handle when you are performing work out of sequence. I like the idea that the logical relationships will be changed to reflect how the work was actually progressed and performed in the field. And so at the end, what we might have is what would amount to perhaps actual logic. And if there's ever a scenario where you are doing kind of a collapse of a schedule where you strip the actual dates out and move the data date back for maybe an analysis of a delay, the actual logic will support your case much more effectively. So to answer question number 2, what is the best practice? I think these are all questions that can be debated, but I do like the idea and believe that where it's possible and allowed, updating the relationships around the data date and progress activities is a process that I would definitely support. Okay. Question number 3 reads, occasionally I import Microsoft project files into P6. Upon doing so, if I change my original duration, I have to manually change the remaining duration to equal the original duration. When creating a file in P6, the remaining duration changes automatically adjust when original duration adjusts. This occurs for planned activities. So it's been a long time, I'll confess, since I imported a Microsoft project file, and where I think the setting to help this question and resolve it will be this setting at the project level to link budget and at completion for not started activities. We were able to have a little bit of time to review this, and I had some folks do an import of a Microsoft project file, just do the basic import and then check for this setting. And it looked like this was unchecked inside of, and it looked like this setting with box was unchecked inside of P6 after creating the project. So let me just open this up and we can kind of just show you quickly this one here. I will add a column for my remaining duration. Put it next to my original. And so here, these are planned activities. We do not have status. And at present, if I make this, say, 20 days, both my original and remaining durations will be changed automatically. If I uncheck this box, then even for activities that are not progressed, my remaining duration and my original duration will no longer be connected and linked, so I would have to update one at a time to get them to match. So to answer for question number 3, after you do the Microsoft project import, we did not find any place in the actual import settings that allows us to say, hey, how do we want to handle any situation for an activity that doesn't have status, for the original and remaining durations to be different. So after the import of the project, I would check this box here that says link budget and at completion for not started activities, then go through and do a review and make sure that all of the durations are appropriate. And hopefully that helps resolve the issue of having to go through all of your schedule activities and one by one make edits to both the remaining and the original durations for your activities. Okay. Question 4 asks, what are the implications of using roles instead of resources from start to finish of a project, and would any special configuration be needed to implement? So this is a good question, and we actually get this question a lot. The first thing to understand are the fundamental differences inside of P6 between roles and resources. So our roles are intended for future planning of project requirements. The intent of the roles are for projects that we are maybe planning in a next fiscal year, and we want to begin to do some high-level capacity analysis. So we can set up roles in our P6 environment, and the roles are typically going to be titles or skill sets. There will be project manager, superintendent, cost engineer, and these can be assigned to activities and future schedules, and then eventually, as the project gets closer, those roles are replaced or updated with an actual resource. And so the resources can be any labor, non-labor, or material, or equipment or materials, and can also be down to the individual or crew. So the resources in P6 are perhaps a lower level, a greater level of detail than what we have in the overall role dictionary. When we look at roles and resources in P6, there are probably more similarities than differences. Whether we use a role or a resource, they are both assigned at the activity level. So down here, when we see at the actual assignment details for an activity, I can assign a resource or simply assign a role. But once they are there, all of the fields that we would typically see at the resource assignment are budgeted units, units per time. They work they work in an identical fashion. We have the same fields. The calculations are used. So they're very similar once we assign them to them, to activities. Both the roles and resources are global and hierarchical in nature. So for reporting, they can be rolled up to higher level. The primary difference between our roles and resources are how they are set up in the P6 dictionary. So I put together kind of just a quick little matrix of some common functionality to look at maybe some of the differences between roles and resources. So for example, can we assign budgeted cost units at the activity level? The answer is yes for both. Curves and cost accounts, yes. But for example, resources allow us to use coding structures to further filter, group, and report on our resource assignments. And roles do not have a specific function such as that. Also, when you're thinking of a more granular level of detail, and this kind of goes back to the overall model between roles and resources in P6, things like shifts are available at the resource but not the role level. And roles do not have different designations in terms of the type of resource. So they are pretty much limited or primarily used for labor. Whereas our resource, we can have labor, materials, or equipment. But both have full capabilities to look in things like the resource assignments view, the capability to bucket plan, group, filter, sort. So they are very, very synonymous. The only other thing, and I don't mention it in here, that I'm really aware of as far as the difference in terms of usability or features is that if you are using EPPM or P6 Web, in the portfolio views, there is a capacity planning view that utilizes specifically roles and not resources. So it's a very graphical, very colorful view. If you are using that or desire to use it, roles will be required to be used to get the best use of that particular graphic. Okay, question 5 asks, is there an alternative way to cost load a schedule without using roles or resources for some or all of the activity? And the answer to this would be yes, and it is the expenses tab. So the expenses are at the activity level, and a lot of organizations use and prefer the expensive. There's a certain ease of use to it. They are not required to have a dictionary that gets set up and assigned. They're fairly free form and they're fairly easy to work with. But there's a few considerations when you're looking at the expenses as a way to cost load schedules. The first is that there are no curves. So the accrual type, which you can see the column here, if we were to select here, there would be a pull-down menu that says all at the start, all at the finish, or uniform over the activity. And these are the three options that we have for our expenses. So if you are working with activities that span multiple months and you plan to do the cost loading there, there will be a certain lack of precision. But however, if you are cost loading at a very detailed activity level where most of the activity durations are within 5 to 10 days, the expenses could be a very good place to do. One of the things is where they differ from resources is when resources, there can be settings when I status an activity that the status of the units or cost can be updated automatically as the activity % complete changes. This does not happen automatically with expenses. The one exception would be where I found that it does work or can work is if we use the update progress function, which is the automated way to update progress through a particular window. And it updates all of the activities as if they went according to their planned dates. But if you are doing a traditional update where we are statusing on the status tab and we are doing these kind of one at a time, each activity one at a time, the progress for expenses, if there is any kind of % complete that is to be reported, that will get updated manually on this at the details for the individual activity. A lot of the reasons people like the expenses is they're easy to work with and there's no global dictionary required, which makes them project specific. So it is likely now that we are seeing a lot more requirements for expenses within specifications. These could be for owners who want to import a contractor schedule file, but do not want to infringe upon their own global dictionaries for the resources. So by specifying that cost be loaded on the expenses tab, it ensures that no global data will be brought in specifically, such as like a resource assignment. So that's one of the appeals that folks have with our expenses. Okay, question 6 asks, how do we eliminate the space between text in headers and footers? So what we see here is a page, a sample screen of the page setup. And I just want to maybe jump into P6 real quick, and I'll open up a file, and we'll just kind of see if we can quickly take a look at our setup here for our header and footer. So the question asks, how do we eliminate the space between text? My first thought was maybe the question refers to this space in here between what we have listed as our layout on the left-hand side and the actual dividers between these. But one option in here is I can take these dividing lines and I can click and drag them to the left. And one of the nice things that it does is you'll notice as I drag these, if you see the percentage in section 1, it will increase or decrease as I move the bar. So this way it will allow me to create some uniform between my outside edges, and it'll automatically adjust what's in section 2. So I can hit apply. We can see that these bars between have been moved over a little bit. If we're talking about space, we can obviously update the height of our header and footer. And if I wanted to maybe make these to be either on the left or right side, we have the ability to say which side of the window do we want them to be on the left, or do we want them to be on the right. So if the idea for this question is to take up this little space in between the text and the lines that divide the header and footer, look at these dividing sections and adjust these accordingly and see if that does not help you out with your headers and footers. Okay, so that was question 6. Question 7 is another one we hear from time to time, and the question asks, are time periods for period reporting apply to specific projects or all projects globally? So I took this question to be a reference to the financial periods as we have in P6. So the simple answer for the financial periods are yes. The financial periods are global and they are not project specific in the P6 database. And so we do hear that question quite a bit, but unfortunately there's only one answer to that for financial periods. Okay, question 8 and 9 I kind of combined here. Number 8 asks, is there a way to increase the number of characters available for the names of layouts? And the answer to this question, I believe, is no. There is in P6 a section in the admin preferences that identifies data limits for fields where you can set things such as the character limits for, say, activity IDs, and things in your P6 database. But one of the areas I did not see in that list would be the number of characters that are available to name the layouts. I don't know the actual restriction in terms of what that limit is, but there is no setting that to expand that or reduce it. Question number 9 is something that was interesting. The question asks, is there a way to permanently alter the column widths in dialog boxes? And it explains that the issue is this: column width in many dialog boxes obscure content because they are too narrow, forcing us to adjust them to usable width every time we use them. An example is the box from which you select an EPS node when importing a project. It would be great if P6 would remember those adjustments so we would not have to repeat them every time. This also applies to code detail window. Column width adjustments are not remembered. And so my answer to this one was sometimes. And what I mean by when I say sometimes is, let me get this dialog box, is the specific example that was brought up related to an import and selecting the which EPS do we want to import to. That one, I kind of ran through it a few times and was able to verify that, yes, the box seems to be similar in terms of the width of the columns each and every time. But I was looking at this with activity codes. And so you can see maybe I purposely took this description area and shrunk it down to be very, very small. And I found that when I open this repeatedly for different activities or in different projects, it has maintained how I left this originally. So this was the columns here. It did seem that once I set them to be a different width, that when I would look at, say, a different activity, it would remember which one I used last. I can open up maybe a different project, try again. And so it seems to be recalling how I last left this window. The same I found to be true with our resource window. So when I select the resource window, I added these columns that maybe I would not typically add for other phone or office phone. And I found that when I would take these and remove them, when I opened up the dialog box again, those columns would be removed. And I kind of bounced around and opened and closed different projects to see if the change maintained its effect. And it seemed to do what I would want it to do, namely how I left the window and the box along with the columns and the widths seemed to be maintained. Now, as I was going through this, I recalled this was a knowledge-based article that was from quite a few years ago, but I do recall that it was mentioned in the article that there was a problem with information being saved properly. Now, for the windows, these dialog boxes that pop up, most of them have a actual icon in here that says close the window. But what I do see people do a lot is click just the X to close the window, as opposed to using the actual icon to close the window. What the knowledge base article indicated was that closing using this X function here may not allow the information to be saved. And again, I wasn't able to replicate that entirely, but that might be something that would be that you might want to look at in terms of investigating what might be the cause of this. But that's the only part I could think of. However, in looking back at the original question, the import, when it gets to the part of the import process where it asks which EPS node do we want to import to, that window always I did find I had to kind of retoggle it. The reason for that, I'm assuming, is that unlike maybe codes or resources, when I click assign, it can leave this window open because I can assign more than one. But when we are doing that import, the moment I select the EPS and hit assign, it's going to close the window automatically. So for this particular question, question number 9, I did get various results. So what I would encourage whoever submitted this question, maybe try closing the dialog boxes by using the actual icon here for close, and see if we don't get any different results. There may be other reasons for it, such as maybe permissions, which could contribute to this as well. But in this environment that I'm looking at right now, we are on a standalone environment, and I have admin super user privileges, but the dialog box windows seem to behave as he would want in this particular night. Okay, so that's question number 9. Question number 10, this is long, we'll read through. Question number 10 asks, when the cursor is in a code or WBS field, and there is a code or WBS assigned, is there a way to get P6 to recognize that assignment in the code or WBS structure? So to clarify, the issue is that in an activity's general detail window and in the WBS field, if we want to adjust the WBS assignment one level up or down, for whatever reason, I'm not allowed to just edit the field, so I must click into the select WBS, the ellipse. Now this talks about in earlier days, the software would automatically go to the existing assignment in the WBS structure. Making small adjustments was easy. P6 ends up putting you at the top of the WBS structure and forces you to scroll through. And then ask, why can this not be different? So I found a project in my standalone environment that did have a fair amount of WBS structure associated with it. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, if I scroll down deep into the schedule towards the bottom, down here in my marine trenching, and I look at the activity details, and if I wanted to change the WBS assignment for this, by clicking the ellipse, when the window pops up, it already puts me kind of at the overall top. And therefore, if I wanted to move something down, I have to go down here all to the bottom. And I have to do this scroll, and depending on some of the size of the project, the WBS structure can be significant. So it can definitely create for more effort than what you might want to ordinarily use. So as far as solutions, the first thing is the filtering up on the top. It is very responsive in the search in my WBS. So if I know which WBS I would like to move it to. If I know the name of that, I can use the search function, and it is very responsive, very friendly to use. The other option is if I were only needing to move this from, say, this WBS element for RV5, and I wanted to move it down here to RV6, what I do more often than not is I click and drag, and I would just drag and drop. And this way I do not have to go into the details down here where I have a window to scroll. I can do these directly in my window, and here I'll try 2 at a time and move these up. And I can use a drag and drop. The thing with the drag that seems to be key is I can click and hold down, and then I have to kind of come over the left side in my group and sort. And you can see my cursor now looks like it has a little piece of paper attached to it. That lets me know it has the activity, and now I can drag and drop. So depending on how far you need to go, dragging and dropping, if I have to scroll, can be more difficult. But if I needed to drag just one activity and say just take it up a few lines, or I can see it in the view, drag and drop is probably going to be the easiest way to go about this, to where I do not have to go in and open up my WBS window and then use the scroll here to find the activity or the WBS that I need. If I am needing to use the window, I would suggest utilizing the search function to quickly parse down the available WBS options, and hopefully that makes it will make it easier for you there. Okay, but those are two good questions there. Question 11 asks, there used to be a way to do a bar chart where all the bars could be placed on one line. For example, I have a summary bar chart of a project with 4 phases using the WBS levels. Currently, the bar chart has 5 lines to show project, subtotal, as subtotal, planning, design, construction, post-construction, the 4 bars. P3, again, is it possible to place the planning, design, construction, and post-construction bars on one line instead of on separate lines? Is this possible in P6? So what I interpreted this question to mean is, can I collapse my activities into one single summary bar for the project and perhaps have some way to designate between the different phases of the project, such as planning, design, construction, and closeout? So the answer to this is we can incorporate those in P6. So I'm going to see if I can open a layout here that I kind of have prepared. And this one, okay. So a couple of things. If I wanted to collapse this to one single row, I can just click the collapse, the little icon to the left of the project, and it will maintain everything onto a single row. Now, I've done a couple of things here in this layout. Number one is, in order to try to keep this as clean as possible, meaning I want to limit the number of hash marks, if you will, for all the unique activities. One thing I believe that is helpful in creating a summary layout is to potentially use WBS summary activities. So in this case, I've got a filter running for the WBS summary activities in my schedule. The second thing I've done is I used the WBS categories to create the elements for planning, design, construction, and close. And once I had that, I would create custom bars. And so what the custom bars allow me to do is to have a unique filter that says if the WBS category is equal to planning, show that bar as an orange bar. I can show the design as a different color, construction, and closeout. And so this will give me kind of the phasing by the color. And as I collapse, I can see those bars on one single row, but with the coloring have a clear distinction between the different phases of the project. Within each of these bars, one important item to get this to work are the bar settings. And when I look at this bar for planning on the bar settings, make sure that the checkbox is here that says show bar when collapsed. So if I were to remove this for a few bars, when I collapse, you'll see that those bars will disappear. So if you are doing a kind of collapse of your schedule and the bars are suddenly disappearing, make sure you look at the bars that you have displayed, check the bar settings, and ensure that on the bar settings we have the checkbox there that says show bar when collapsed. And again, in creating this, one of the recommendations is to try to limit the number of activities. And so WBS summaries can be very helpful. You could potentially also use this with level of effort, but the summaries will make this as clean as possible for you to do. And then the custom bars are fairly easy to do. Save your layout so you do not have to recreate these each and every time. And then if you have these across multiple projects, P6 will obviously allow you to open up multiple projects, collapse them all to create a single view. You can put unique labels onto these, which would be % complete, the description. A lot of different options are available for you in creating these summary bars. So the answer to this question in question 11 is yes, it is possible, and it's something that I think P6 does very well. Okay, question number 12. Question number 12 asks about a global change. And the question is, global change of activity resource assignments will not let you set resource durations. Is there another way to do this? So in looking at this particular item, it is true. When we are looking at the global change options for resource assignments, we do not have the ability to edit or update fields for original duration or remaining duration for those resource assignments. So the option, assuming that if we were interested in doing this via global change, I'm assuming that as part of this question, there is a lot of like information that we would want to populate. So the option that I'm going to suggest and show here is to utilize specific columns in the resource assignments view and utilize the fill down function in place of the global change option. So let's look and see if we'll go in and let's look at maybe some examples. We'll open up my standard layout. And so here we have a few, our activities, and we have some resource assignments for the activities. So by doing this, what I may be assuming that the question would like to do is to say, I've got an activity here that's a 10-day duration, but I would like my resources to maybe either span a longer duration or perhaps even a shorter duration. So in looking at just the duration, right now when I update the original duration here in the resource, it's going to automatically link to my P6 activity. So the first thing, if we wanted to make any edits to the duration of the resource and perhaps have it be different from the activity, is we're going to need to look and find and make sure that we are seeing this column right here that says drive activity dates. So if I uncheck this, let me first go back, we will keep it checked. So we can look at my resource spread over the activity. So you can see that the dates at the resource hours are in alignment with the activity itself. If I uncheck this drive activity dates, for my resource, I can make this duration 20. Now you'll notice the units per time was reduced. Your settings will influence how this is handled in P6, but my original duration in my activity here remained at 10, and my original duration of the resource is showing as 20. And when I look at the assignment, I will see that the resource will spread beyond the duration of the activity. So I'm going to set this back here to 10. So these would be the steps that we would want to do manually. Now, if I had a lot of resource assignments over hundreds of activities, this would be cumbersome to do one at a time at each activity's details. So what I'm going to suggest is possibly going to the resource assignments view and adding these columns that we adjusted, and then using the fill down option. So for example, I can uncheck the box for drive activity dates, fill down, and then if I want to adjust the duration of my activities and fill down, I see the effect of adjusting the duration of the resource independent of the activity. And I've done it at least as quickly as possible. With the original question of looking at this via global change, when we look at our resource assignments, in this list, we don't find any options to make the original duration. We have a lag, but we have no original or remaining durations that we can utilize. Those for global change only exist here with our activities. But for our activity resource assignments, we do not have those same options. So if there is some continuity and I can collect the information in a meaningful way in my resource assignments view, rather than using a global change, it might be possible to organize your information in such a way that you can utilize a fill down to accomplish this same task. And so that's what I would suggest here, is to try the resource assignments view and add some columns and use the fill down function and see if that does not help you. Okay, last one, question 13, and then I think, we can, maybe if we have a little time, there might be some questions. So question 13, sometimes an activity start and finish time no longer comes out as 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Assuming the settings are for an 8-hour day and that the schedule should be in days, and subsequent activities are supposed to have a 1-day duration, are calculating as 2 days because the start time is at 4 p.m. and the finish time is at 4 p.m. the next day. So the question is, how can this be fixed? So in the screenshot here, the example is I have a 1-day activity that starts on the 28th and finishes on May 1st. Well, logically, a 1-day activity should start and finish on the same day. So we have this activity spanning multiple days, and the question is, why does that happen? So let's look at, I'll open up another project here and see if I have a layout saved. Okay. So here we see our example of my single day activity that spans multiple days. The first way in kind of looking at this, or at least identifying the problem, if you find this to be in your schedule, and it's a good way to do kind of a spot check in your schedule, is to look for these 1-day activities that span multiple days. But in your user preferences, turn on the ability on the Dates tab, turn on the ability to show time. And this will show us that, yes, indeed, we have an activity from 4 p.m. that the next activity will start at 4 p.m. as well. Now, for each of the calendars, one of the things that's important and to answer to this question is to check for and modify as needed the detailed hours in the assigned calendar for activities. So what I commonly find is that some of the default calendars have the 1 hour lunch period marked as non-work, and these calendars will typically have a work day of 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and other calendars do not, and so they show an 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. workday. And so the default calendars, when you first deploy P6, some of the default calendars that are available when you first open the software, they have this difference. And so open up your calendars and look at these detailed work hours per day. And the recommendation will be to put them in alignment. So as we can see here, we've got a 7-day calendar, the global 7-day calendar, 7-day work week, and this is going to have a work day of 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. The successor activity is looking at a standard 5-day work week, and if we look at the calendar for our standard 5-day work week, we'll see on the detailed hours that this actually has the lunch hour blocked out as non-work. So this calendar will go from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So the result of this is as the first activity, A1000, ends at 4 p.m., the successor activity is on a calendar that indicates this activity is available to work between 4 and 5 p.m. It completes the remaining hours the next day and then ties into the next activity. The recommendation here, how do we fix this? Well, the first recommendation I would make is that the calendars that you use should be a uniform a day. The work day should be uniform, whether that's 8 to 5 or 8 to 4. There's no correct answer to that, but what I would like to see is to keep a more uniform calendar across the ones that you use. So whether it's a 4-day calendar, 5-day, 6-day, 7-day calendar, if our planning unit is a day, it is a good idea to look at all of the calendars you use and make sure and look at that lunch period. Do we do an 8 to 4 day and not specify the lunch as non-work? Let's see what we have here. Or do we look at an 8 to 5 day and specify that the noon to 1 is a non-work period? That would be the recommendation for how do we resolve this. If all of my calendars utilize the same hours per day in their detailed hours, then we should not have these different edge conditions where one activity ends at 4 p.m., but the next activity works from 4 to 5 or 4 to 6, whatever it might be. What often further compounds, this is the calendars are one of the things that I find that when there is something that seems odd in P6 about the display. So for example, we've got I have no constraints, but my critical path is just this kind of one bar here. And you can see the preceding activity maybe has 1 hour of float because it ends at 4 p.m., but it is technically available to work from 4 to 5. So this activity shows as having 1 hour of float, and therefore we only see one activity on our critical path. But these are all items that can lead to some confusion when looking at the data. So the question of how do we resolve this? Check your calendars, align them for hours per day in terms of what the hours per day are, align them across the calendars that you use, and if you don't need to use a whole lot of fancy calendars, the recommendation is to try to keep it as simple as possible for those. Okay, and so that concludes the questions we have for our upcoming events. For those of you, hopefully we'll see you in Orlando at the AAC annual meeting. And for those of you in Southern California, we will be at the CMAA Tech Expo in Long Beach in June as well. Also, keep an eye out for our monthly newsletter, The Loop, for information regarding DRMcNatty and upcoming future webinars. And with that, Dan, do we have any questions that have come in? I think we have maybe about 5 minutes.
Yeah, we did receive some feedback on some of the items that you had covered today. And again, there were a lot more questions that were submitted offline prior to the webinar. And just as a reminder for those questions, we are going to answer those for you. We are doing a follow-up email that's going to include a link to the recording of the webinar, a copy of the slideshow presentation, and that question and answer log where we are going to answer all the remaining questions that we could not get to today. But some of the feedback that we did receive in regards to question 6, where they were talking about the large space between lines of text and headers and footers, some feedback that we received is an answer to this question is you can also hold shift when pressing enter, and that should help alleviate the issue that you are getting as well too.
Okay, that's good. And I guess these are, this is a good part, and what I hope, the forum provides is I've got one set of eyes looking at it, but I know there's a lot of people that participate in our webinars that have maybe seen these problems and experience. So if there are, I would love to follow up with you and hear what solutions you might have found to answer some of these questions. And I think that type of information would be great. So I appreciate that comment.
Yeah, and again, the rest of the questions that were submitted, there's probably about 8 to 10 of them. We're going to get the answers to them. We'll get those out to you. We appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to join us, taking the time pre-webinar to submit the questions to us. And I expect that follow-up email to go out in the next day or so, and we'll make sure that everybody receives it.
Okay.
Thank you all for today, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.